Welcome to Sincerely Me, a podcast about self-discovery and inner work so you can cultivate a deeper relationship to yourself and show up more fully in your work and life. My name is Tallia and I'm honored to be your host. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. It is officially April 1st, which means we are starting with our first theme in the Inner Work Book Club, which is authenticity. And I could not think of a better episode to start this month off with than this conversation with Ingrid. So I'll get to what you can expect in this conversation in just a bit. But I wanted to start by sharing a quick little tangential story as to why I started this community and why I started this book club. And the thing is that if you know anything about me, it's that you know how much I am here to talk about the things that matter most to our human condition: courage, fear, happiness, pain, love, shame, kindness, purpose, meaning, living a life of significance, cultivating a relationship to self. I want to tell you about the things that make me who I am and learn about the things that make people who they are. I want to talk about what it's like to be a first-generation Iranian American who was raised Jewish, who loves chocolate chip pancakes, who believes in past lives, who works as a coach, and who has a hard time meditating sometimes. I want to talk about what gets us out of bed in the morning. I want to know what keeps you up at night, and I want to know everything in between. I want to know what you see when you look in the mirror. I want to tell you what I see. I want to know your joys, your fears, your innermost thoughts. And I want to share mine too. I want to stop dancing around it, and I want to get to the heart of you, of me, of our humanness. So yeah, I created the Inner Work community and book club to explore all of the facets that make us who we are in deep connection. And if you're not a big reader, that's fine. It's for readers and non-readers alike. It's just a space to talk about the important things, the things that matter most. So in a way, it is reading optional, and I provide so many resources and content and recaps and coaching tools to help you apply the things that we learn together to your daily life. And like I mentioned, April's theme is authenticity, and we're talking all about owning your story, letting go of what people think, and what it's like to show up bravely and courageously for yourself in your own life. So again, I could not think of a better way to get this month kicked off with than this episode and this conversation with Ingrid. And if you're just as nerdy as me and are excited to talk about all of these topics that make us who we are, that enrich our beautiful, messy lives, like authenticity, vulnerability, courage, love, fear, purpose, meaning, all the things, I would invite you to check out the community and book club. Head over to talliadeljoux.com/book club for all the information you might need. So here's a bit more about my conversation with Ingrid. Her and I talk a lot about living intentionally, and really the conversation ended up taking us to this place where she shares about the struggles, the challenges, the pain that she's gone through over the past year, and how she's learned to deal with the discomfort, to be with the pain, the grief, the anxiety. And we've all been there, right? And many of us might be going through the mud right now. And one of the things she shared with me, I'm not sure who said this or if this is an actual quote, but she says, "The universe will give you the boat, but you have to do the rowing." So I see this as a conversation, yes, about dealing with discomfort and pain, but more so about being authentic, showing up as real and claiming your story and fully expressing yourself, whatever that means for you. And for Ingrid, it's in the form of creativity, but it's finding that fullest expression of you authentically and owning it. We also talk about how resisting the discomfort and pain is what creates a lot of the suffering we might experience in life, and that it's important to slow down to be with whatever needs to come up. Really, it's surrendering too, right? Like, how do you just surrender to whatever it is that is and learn to move with it and through it ultimately? One of my biggest takeaways that Ingrid highlights in this conversation is that many of us have to reach a point where we're on the kitchen floor crying, as she shares she did, where staying the same feels scarier than making a change. So she shares a lot about that moment for her on the kitchen floor, where she realized it was time to make a change, to pick herself up and to learn how to deal with the discomfort. So I cannot wait for this conversation. And we decided to jump right into this episode with Ingrid's story as she shares about one of the most challenging years she's had in her life. So you'll hear her begin with her story, and I hope you enjoy.
So last year was really difficult for me. And, you know, it really felt like one of those years where I was just going through the mud, like really sticky mud that was maybe combined with a little bit of quicksand too, where
Yep.
I just really felt like I was going through it. And it was something that I really chose to keep private while I was going through it, because one of my number one rules for myself is that I don't share things publicly that I'm currently still in process with. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that everything is a process, but I prefer not to share things publicly when I'm in the mud,
Yeah.
really going through it, and I don't even fully know where I am in that moment. And so last year I was going through a lot of changes. I moved to New York about a year and a half ago. So, you know, I moved from Los Angeles. Moving is one of the most stressful things that you can
Mm-hmm.
go through in life. And I had always, for the most part, lived in Southern California for, almost 30 years of my life. And then decided that I was going to move across the country. So that, it was something that I really wanted. But what I didn't realize was how much I was going to go through, even with something that I really, really wanted. And so that move ended up being really challenging for me because, one of the first things right off the bat was I was leaving my mom in Los Angeles, so she still lives there. I was leaving my best friends, and I had spent years cultivating relationships with them. And I was moving to the city that I always knew I wanted to live in, but I was starting from scratch in a way. I was having to build new relationships with people and also having to figure out how to maintain relationships with people who were still on the other side of the country. And, relationships, that is one of my essential pillars of wellness. And I knew I had to invest in that, and maybe more deeply than I had been used to in the last several years. And that was really difficult for me because what I've learned over the years is that isolation is the worst thing for me. I am definitely an introvert and I recharge, having my alone time, but there's a difference between alone time and being isolated.
For sure.
I have to have connection and meaningful, deep connection with people. And I need to have, you know, uh, I prefer having a smaller group of people that I've known for an extended period of time that I know I can trust. And so moving to New York, my girlfriend is here in New York, but you know, my that's my romantic relationship, and it provides so much for me, but I couldn't rely on my romantic relationship and my professional work to fulfill everything for me.
Yeah.
And so I had to really put myself out into this new city and start meeting people, and it was really daunting, and I honestly put it off for a while because I was really scared. But I took small steps. I had been invited to events that were happening at the Wing, which is a community co-working space that's centered around advancing women. And I had been invited to events as a guest, and I went to these events and I was like, oh my gosh, this is such an incredible community. People are asking such thoughtful questions during these events. And so I thought to myself, well, what would it be like if I joined something like this, or I joined exactly this? I just joined the Wing. And so I thought about it for a little bit, and then I joined the Wing. And shortly after, people just started, messaging me. The Wing has a way where you can directly message people on their app and connect with them, whether you are looking for a professional connection or a friendship connection. And it's really great because you're able to fill in what your interests are and what you are asking for from other people and what you're willing to give to other people, which I found really helpful. And so that can connect you with people who have similar interests, or someone who you can, you know, give something to or receive something from them. And I started making connections with people that way. I started meeting people at events. And, I have one really great friend now who I met at an event, and we stayed in touch. And now she's one of my closest friends here in New York City. And another one, we basically went on a blind date with each other. She had just messaged me and was like, I see that you're looking for podcast recommendations. I have those. Do you want to meet for coffee? And I said yes. And we met up, and she was like, I don't know what I was doing. I was so scared, but I just felt like I should message you and, give myself permission to do this. And I said exactly the same thing. I was like, I didn't know what I was doing either. I just said yes and gave myself permission to do so. And now she's one of my closest friends here in New York. And so, that process of finding friendship was really challenging in New York, but it really was like this foundation that I needed, that I didn't even really know I needed in such a deep way until my life started unfolding in New York. Because after I had, started making these connections, it started to give me security. It started to give me trust. It gave me fun. It gave me an outlet. It gave me a space to, vent frustrations or alleviate stress. And that started to open up the doors in terms of everything else. Because I had that security, I felt safe to start exploring other things that were going on in my life. So I went through some pretty big just career shifts last year, some of which were, my decision, and other things were just entirely out of my control. So last year professionally was really difficult for me because um, creatively, I wasn't sure what I wanted to be doing. I was trying different things, and I was really just starting to get in touch with my creativity in a new and deeper way. And that felt really scary. And I was also experiencing, you know, I make work online. So I make YouTube videos, I post content on Instagram, and I've been doing that for this will now be my 11th year. And I was experiencing some of the lowest numbers that I had ever seen in my decade on the internet. And as much as I would love to say that that doesn't affect me, it does to a certain extent because, from just a business perspective, when you start seeing numbers going down in terms of, the views that you're getting, the people who are um, listening or watching your content, it can feel scary because that's often tied to the income that you're making. And so I
Yeah.
was in a lot of fear around that, like, oh my gosh, is this the end of me? And that was the thing. I was associating it with, like, this is the end of me as a person.
Yeah.
um, and that's a really scary place to be in.
Yeah.
And so I had to do a lot of exploration there. It was like exploration around, my creativity. And I realized I wasn't allowing myself to just explore things just in private. And I wasn't filling up my creative well. I wasn't paying attention to little Ingrid. I had just been telling her no for like a decade.
Mhm.
And I needed to give her what she had been asking for. And that meant, doing things that were completely unrelated to work, that I would never allow myself to do in the past. And um, that was incredibly fulfilling, going to museums, going on walking tours, getting to indulge in my very deep interest of New York City history and learning about it and having it just completely unrelated to my professional life. And I would do these things on my own and have the experience on my own. And it was like I was going on a date with little Ingrid and, taking her to do all the things that she wanted to do.
Mhm.
And that was incredibly enriching. And I often thought, like, oh, this isn't going to have any kind of connection to my professional life or my personal life, but it always did at some point. There was always like some connection that was being made because I was choosing to fill up that well. I was intentionally filling up that well, and it was giving me resources because up until then, I had been drawing from a well that was basically dry, and that's not really going to produce very much. Um, and I think that was really important because I needed that while I was also going through a year where I was making less money than I had made in, you know, 5 or 6 years.
Mhm.
So that was a huge thing too. With business, we are kind of conditioned to think we need to be in a constant state of growth and you always need to be making more than the year before. And as an entrepreneur, I'm never making the same amount every year. I'm never making the same amount month to month. And this was a year where I made substantially less than, the year before and the year before that and the year before that. And so I was really tying that to my self-worth. And it kept coming back to, this is the end of me as a human being. Like, this is it for
Yeah.
me. Like, there's nothing ahead for me. Like, I've used up all my creativity. And it was really difficult because a lot of, old traumas and fears resurfaced in a new way when I found myself in this really vulnerable position where I was experiencing these lows in my professional life that I hadn't experienced before. And it left me feeling vulnerable, which then opened the door to, oh my gosh, all of these like old memories that I didn't even know I had are coming up. These old traumas that I was aware of are coming up again, but in a new way. And, I had a moment last year where I was at my girlfriend's place and I was on her kitchen floor and I was just crying. I was on her floor crying because in her kitchen, I had just like collapsed in her kitchen because I just felt so discouraged and overwhelmed. And I was like, how am I going to um, navigate all of this? Like, it just feels so big and overwhelming. And that was really, I think, the point for me of like the big change because it made me realize that the place that I was in, where I had been avoiding for what I recognize now, years. I had been avoiding making changes in my life for years. Um, Staying the same felt scarier than making those changes.
Mm,
And that was the moment that I realized that. I was like, I need to make these changes because being in this place on the kitchen floor crying and feeling so overwhelmed is not sustainable. I can't do this anymore.
yeah. I love that. That staying the same felt scarier than making the change.
Mhm. Yeah, I know, and that I think has always been the catalyst for change for me
Yeah.
is that exactly. And
Yeah.
for me, that showed up as crying on the kitchen floor of my girlfriend's place. And
Yeah.
she was so wonderful in that moment because she got down on the floor right there with me and just was there with me and
Yeah.
was really supportive and believed in me.
Yeah.
And that's what I needed in that
Mhm.
moment.
Absolutely. Yeah. I just someone to like hold us in that space, to not need it to be any different, to not jump to like fixing the problem, but just to let us feel what needs to be felt, acknowledged, and acknowledge what needs, yeah, acknowledge what is needed. And I think to have recognized for yourself too, and I talk a lot about this on the podcast, like it's not until we recognize a consequence to not taking action that we'll actually do something, right?
Hmm.
And for you, you were like, it sounds like you felt so much consequence to not making the change that there was no choice at that point but to do something different.
Yeah, it just kind of feels like you're repeatedly like just driving yourself into the same wall over and over and over and
Yeah.
over. And
Yeah.
you're just like, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
This just doesn't feel sustainable. And so, you know, that moment led to me taking steps where I was sending out emails that I had been afraid to send out. I was looking at my money in a much deeper way than I ever had in past years. I was digging up my financial story and the multiple stories that I had been telling myself over the years around money. I had incredibly difficult conversations with people where I, um, you know, learned how to communicate honestly and also um, be in an uncomfortable space
Hmm.
and just be in it and
Yeah.
not try to make it go away, or make the other person feel better when that's not something that I feel like I genuinely want or need to do.
Hmm.
I think that often we can find ourselves in uncomfortable conversations with people, and maybe someone gets upset, and then we want to apologize
Hmm.
and kind of like make it better and just diminish the uncomfortable feelings. Um, but what I learned is like there are the moments where you need to say sorry and apologize and take responsibility. And then there are the moments where you don't need to apologize, and that actually those uncomfortable feelings, those emotions need to be felt.
Hmm.
And what is it like to sit in a space with pain and just be there with it, to
Hmm.
be with someone else in a painful situation that just needs to happen.
Yeah.
Um, that was a huge thing for me, and I remember being in moments like that where I had the urge. I felt like inside of me I was like, "Oh my god, I just want to say like I'm so sorry or like try and like make this go away." And I was like, "You cannot, that is not the space for this. Like this needs to happen in the way that it is unfolding right now." And I found that those experiences were so meaningful because it allowed me to communicate honestly, and it allowed, you know, the people that I was going through this with to also communicate honestly. And I think it is a privilege to be with someone in a space of pain and to just like really truly be present in that moment. I think it is so profoundly illuminating.
Mm-hmm.
And when we really step into that space, because we're often seeing parts of ourselves that we don't typically get to see, and we're seeing parts of someone else that we don't get to see.
Yeah.
And I think that is really, really powerful. And all of these exchanges happened with a deep sense of respect too. And I think that that was huge. So those moments were huge, huge teachers for me, just in understanding how to um, be in pain and be in that moment and then let it go when it's ready to go. And to
Mm-hmm.
also understand the language that I am entering my life with. And am I saying what I truly mean, or am I trying to appease a fear inside of me or a fear that I have about someone else's judgment around me?
Mm-hmm. Something that reminds me of too, I've experienced this in my own life as I've moved through my own pain, but also as a coach, I hold space for other people's pain to emerge and to show up. And I think one of the misconceptions or fears, I guess, is that if we let ourselves actually feel into the pain, that it'll somehow take over and that we won't be able to like come back up for air, but it's actually the opposite. And I'm curious what your experience has been, because for me, I know when I've been given the space to be with my pain and to not have to do anything about it or with it or really understand it or change it, it actually passes pretty quickly. And I remember the first couple times I experienced that, it was so shocking to me. I was like, why do we avoid pain because we're afraid of something. We're afraid of it never ending. We're afraid of it hurting too much. But I think it's in the resistance to the pain that the suffering actually comes out or is experienced. And when we can no longer resist, acknowledge it, sit with it, you'll be surprised how quickly it passes and how it just needs the space to like bubble up and move through you. And it just like calmed kind of all of my, however conscious or not, fears around being overtaken by the pain or defining myself by the pain. It was literally the exact opposite experience.
Totally. I mean, I think that is completely true. The resistance to the pain is often what is going to cause us the most suffering. And
Mhm.
it's, we're just not used to, in our daily lives sitting in pain. We're often spending most of our days trying to figure out how to avoid it. And, I think that is one of the reasons why um, yoga has become really just a powerful experience for me because it one is filling up that you know physical wellness, that physical health pillar for me, but it also has taught me how to sit in pain that comes up, not physical pain, because I'm not going to my mat to hurt myself, but
Right.
the emotional pain that can come up when you are moving in certain ways, or maybe you're holding a position for an extended period of time, thoughts and memories and feelings can come up. And having teachers that have given me this space, and other people in the room, this space to be in that pain, that discomfort, has taught me so much. And I've been able to apply that in my life in other ways. And I think even just having that hour of time where, for 3 minutes, I might be in a space where I am feeling a rush of like uncomfortable feelings or memories coming up, is so incredibly powerful because I have learned to breathe through those moments and to know that there is something else coming on the other side, and I don't need to ignore it. I can look at it and look at it in the face and it will be ready to go when it's ready to go. And it's so true. It's often much sooner than we would ever imagine. And I realized that I was really holding on to a lot of negative things just because that's what I was comfortable with. I was like, oh, I'm comfortable with the world of darkness. So
Yeah.
that's just where I'm going to stay. I'm going to stew here.
Yeah.
And it felt foreign to be in the opposite
Yeah.
space. But I have found that like it does want to let go naturally. And I think,
Hmm.
when I hear you talking about how your work is often about, being with other people in their pain and giving space for that. I think about when I was a teenager and my dad died, and I was in so much pain. I think because I didn't have spaces where I was allowed to just be in pain about it.
Yeah.
And I didn't have that until years down the line. And so there was just years of like avoiding it and
Hmm.
years of suffering. And when I started, um, you know, just receiving the space from other people to be in that pain, it was so incredibly healing. And I think grief is something that just always kind of walks alongside you in your life, but
Hmm.
it's so much more than just constant pain and sadness all the time. And that has been such an incredibly valuable experience for me, too. Like acknowledging that pain in my grief has allowed me to experience all of the other facets of grief as well. And they're not all negative, they're not all, sad, horrible, painful things.
Hmm. Yeah, I thank you so much for sharing that. I think so much of what you've shared and what we've been talking about just continues to highlight the importance of slowing down to be with whatever it is that needs to come up. And one thing that I love that you do on your social is the slowdown. So can you tell us a little bit more about the slowdown, what the intention behind that is and why it's important to take those moments to pause, to ask yourself those bigger questions, to be in reflection in order for, yeah, the intention to arise.
So, the intention behind the slowdown, which is a series that I make on Instagram, it's on IGTV. The intention behind it was to have a space on the internet to stop, pause, and reflect, because I have been sharing my work on the internet for the last decade, and the internet can feel like a very overwhelming and negative and very rushed and fast paced place. Um, and I wanted to create something that felt like a safe haven, that felt like a space where I was given permission to take that moment to stop, pause, and reflect and breathe a little slower than I normally do throughout the day. And I wanted to bring in, the work that I'm doing offline and bring it into my online work, because the internet is a place where I share my work, but it's not where I'm doing my work. And so it felt like this really authentic um, project that I wanted to explore, because I felt like that is what I feel like I want to use my creativity for. Like this is the space that I I want to see on the internet, and so I'm gonna make it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been such a fun and at times emotional project to dive into. But essentially, the videos can range anywhere from like 7 minutes to, like, last week we posted one that was 29 minutes long. And I really try to talk about things that have been um, top of mind for me, whether it's over the last week or over the last couple weeks or maybe over the last month. But these are things that, ideas, practices that have really been coming to life for me. And I talk about these things on the slowdown. And sometimes I'll talk about things that I've been reflecting on and working on for a really long time, but I wanted those moments to just stop, pause, and reflect, and also celebrate that work that is being done, and to give myself permission to do that. And I also have to say that Christina has been the biggest champion
Mhm.
of this series. She definitely encouraged me to do it when I was nervous about it, and she's there every time we record one. And I feel so grateful to have someone who I really trust, who is like hearing these things before anyone else is,
Mhm.
and who is such an incredible creative person to work with and to hold that space with. That is such a huge part of the work that I do, being with people, and Christina on a daily basis, who is someone who I can totally trust.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so important, especially in the world of entrepreneurship. It can feel super isolating, and to not have someone to bounce ideas off of, and to just, yeah, share in that space with you can be really difficult. So I'm just very lucky, and lucky to know Christina myself as well, but also happy to hear that you've found that kind of partnership in a business sense that allows your creativity to really find its place, and a way to share it with the world that feels good to you.
Yeah. And, I think that for myself, my business is personal. My business is tied to my life. And there are things that I've had to learn around that, and boundaries that I've had to learn about and have learned how to set in my life. But essentially, my purpose is to be creative and to tell stories. That is what my purpose is. And this slowdown is just another way for me to tell stories about my life and to claim my story for
Mhm.
myself.
I love that. Yeah, I think just finding ways. I talk a lot about purpose and think a lot about questions around purpose and how to find it and what is purpose, and what that just brought up for me is this idea that it's really just about finding the thing that's gonna make you feel like you can fully and authentically express yourself. Like for me, it's about authentic self-expression, and that the expression of you and your truth is going to look differently throughout your life, but it's about knowing what that truth is and trusting that when you can step forward from that place, the world is only going to respond. Not I shouldn't say the world's only going to respond favorably, because I also think that when you step out in your truth and with authenticity, you're also exposing yourself to criticism and judgment, and that's just a reality of it. But that that at the end of the day is in my opinion like the only thing that you can control is how you decide to show up, and everything else you just kind of have to let it unfold as it needs to.
Yeah. And, having that realization, that clarity around my purpose last year took me from being on the kitchen floor, crying and sobbing and feeling completely overwhelmed, and entering this space of expansion. Because when I realized, oh, my purpose is to be creative and to tell stories, I was like, there's so many ways I can do that. I can
Yeah.
do this in ways that are familiar to me, but kind of play around with how I've been doing it and explore it in a new way. There are new things that I've never done before that I would love to try. And so
Mhm.
that, I think now I'm in that place where it feels like exhilarating. I've gone through that like really sticky mud, but I
Mhm.
have that guiding light. I'm
Yeah.
supposed to be creative. I'm here to be creative and to tell stories.
Mhm.
So now I'm playing around with the different ways that I can do that. And it feels incredible. Um, and it has also empowered me to ask for what I'm worth and ask for the money that I want to be paid. And already this year, I am setting myself up in a much more positive way than last year. And I
Mhm.
have so much more clarity around my relationship with money. It's something that, I will always be working on, but I know what's real. I know what's in front of me, and I know what, my doubts and fears are. And
Mhm.
um, it just feels like I'm just at the edge of the universe and anything could happen. And
Yeah.
this is the place that I was going through the mud for.
Yeah.
And I someone told me last year that, you know, the universe will give you the boat, but you have to do the rowing. And
Mhm.
so I felt like I was rowing through the mud, and I
Yeah.
was rowing and rowing and rowing and rowing, and I was like, I don't know what all this rowing is like actually doing. Is it doing anything? Because sometimes I'm feeling like I'm not getting that far. But I always had faith that there would be this moment.
Mhm.
And I remember the first time that I felt that moment, and I was like, oh, this is it. This is what all that rowing was for. And it happened over the summer. And I was just like, this is, I'm here. And it just felt like endless potential.
Mhm. I feel like that I was actually talking to my neighbor about this earlier because she is someone who if you were to walk up to her and meet her any given day, any time of day, regardless of what's happened, is just like the most joyful, like happiest human being in the world. And I was talking to her about this cuz she this is kind of a side story, but she wants to become a speaker and she's trying to figure out, what would I speak to people about? And I looked at her and I said, okay, well, what's the question everybody asks you? And she was like, she kind of laughed and she was like, everyone just wants to know how happy I am all the time. And I was like, yes, as someone who experiences and engages with you, like that is my biggest question. Like, how are you always so excited about life? And we kind of like worked through the weeds of everything and we came down to this truth for her that is that when anything is possible, how could you not be the most excited, joyful, exhilarated, happy person in the world? And that like that is how she moves through the world. It's with this core belief that at any given time anything is possible and I get to create, and as a creative, I get to create those possibilities for myself. Like how freaking exciting, right?
Yeah.
And it just reminded
Yeah.
me from what you said is like that's what I hear from you too. It's like how could life not be beautiful when you realize that anything is possible and that you get to create whatever it is that you want.
Totally. And then you get to take that energy and be a champion for other people too.
Yeah.
Because when you feel that inside of yourself, you
Mhm.
start recognizing that potential in other people. And
Right.
when they start vocalizing their dreams and, their doubts and their fears, you are able to step into that space with them
Mhm.
and encourage them and tell them that it is possible. And that has such a powerful domino effect in our world because
Mhm.
I can immediately think of the people who have been my champions from a very young age. Those people stay with us. And it is an honor to have them, and it is an honor to be one.
Mhm. I love this. I feel like it's a perfect segue into one of my closing questions. We've talked about purpose, we've talked about creating possibility. So, one of the questions I'd love to ask you here is what does it mean for you at this point in your life through the work you've done, the experiences you've had, the relationships you've built? What does it mean for you to live a life of significance?
I'm taking a breath to really sink into this. To live a life of significance to me means to be in touch with my creative self and to tell the stories that are coming up inside of me that are always changing, and to show up as who I am on that day, in that moment, and to do it with a sense of grace and kindness and optimism.
And if you were to write a letter to yourself, dear Ingrid, what would you want to say to yourself today?
Dear Ingrid, you are endlessly creative. You are brave, and you have shown up as who you are today. And that is something to be so proud of.
Yes, it is. And thank you so much for showing up today as you are, telling your story, laying it all out, telling us that it's okay to have those those moments on the kitchen floor.
Yep,
Because
they're real.
in those moments of surrender is when we can move into that next phase of life of who we are and of what's meant to come up.
Completely.
Yeah.
Surrendering is beautiful.
Hmm. Well, I appreciate you being here so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Please let everyone know how they can reach out, say hello, and see all the beautiful work you're doing in the world.
Well, I like to keep it really simple, so you can find me everywhere on the internet at Ingrid Nilsen. And I also have a podcast that you were a guest on. It is
Yay.
called One Step, so you can find that wherever you listen to podcasts.
Amazing. And we'll have all of that linked in the show notes. Thank you so much, Ingrid. This was such a joy, and I cannot wait to see all the beautiful creative work you continue to do in the world.
Thank you so much, Talia. I loved our conversation. Thank you for having me.
All right, everyone. That was my lovely conversation with Ingrid. And as I'm sitting here listening back to this conversation with her, I can't help but think about some of the biggest things I've learned from Brene Brown as I've been reading through her book, The Gifts of Imperfection. It's, like I mentioned earlier, the first book we're exploring in the book club, all around the idea of authenticity this month. And she lays out what she calls the 10 guideposts to wholehearted living. And I won't share all 10 of them because we'd be here for quite some time. If you want to know more and get the full scoop on her 10 guideposts, join us in the book club. But the few guideposts that I wanted to highlight that I heard come up through Ingrid's story were first, cultivating meaningful work by letting go of self doubt. That's the first one I heard. The second one was cultivating creativity by letting go of comparison and letting go of the hustle. For her, I also heard Brene's third guidepost, which is cultivating self compassion by letting go of perfectionism. And then the other one, cultivating authenticity by letting go of what people think. So, authenticity, self compassion, creativity, meaningful work. So many of these guideposts really came to light in this conversation with Ingrid, and just highlight again the importance of being intentional in the things you choose to pay attention to, and how cultivating authenticity, being with pain and discomfort, requires work, right? It's inner work. And in order to cultivate a rich and deep, meaningful inner life, there's work we got to do. There's stillness we need to create. There's space we need to be with ourselves and the things that are calling for our attention. So, thank you to Ingrid for sharing yourself and your story so beautifully and so openly and so honestly with us. What a beautiful example of bravery and courage in a way that I hope encourages all of us to show up a little bit more openly in our lives as well. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I hope to see you in the book club this month as we explore authenticity and the gifts of imperfection. And as a final PS, you can check out my episode on Ingrid's podcast, One Step, all about facing your money fears. That went live this week. and I have linked it in the show notes for you to give a listen to. Thank you guys so much for being here today. As always, if you enjoyed this episode, go ahead and give us a shout out on the gram at Tallia Del Jus. Subscribe, rate, and review. It means the world. We will catch you on next week's episode. Sincerely, me.